It was 6:22 a.m. at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows and a soft orange glow across the sprawling tarmac. Inside the terminal, the usual morning chaos unfolded. Rolling suitcases rattled on polished floors. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the sterile scent of airplane fuel, and tired travelers shuffled to their gates, eyes half-lidded from restless sleep. Among the sea of faces, one man stood out, not because he tried to, but because he simply carried himself differently. Derek Marshall moved through the crowd with the quiet confidence of a man used to being observed, yet never needing to prove anything. At 42 years old, Derek was tall and lean, with skin the rich tone of polished mahogany and a meticulously groomed beard that framed a face marked by calm intensity. He was not a man in a rush. Every step he took was deliberate, measured, a rhythm that suggested he was always 5 steps ahead in a mental game that only he could see. His dark eyes scanned the surroundings with a practiced detachment, catching small details others might miss. The jittery glance of a mother juggling a toddler in carry-on bags, the tired sigh of a businessman drowning in emails on his phone, the quiet laughter of a group of college students taking selfies by the window. Derek adjusted the strap of his black leather duffel bag slung over one shoulder, then reached into his pocket to pull out his boarding pass. Without a word, he presented it to the gate agent, a young woman with a friendly smile who greeted him warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Marshall. You're all set. Enjoy your flight." He gave a slight nod in response. No smile, but not unfriendly either. Just efficiency. That was Derek. Efficient, precise, professional. The agent handed back his pass and watched as he walked down the jet bridge toward the waiting aircraft. Once aboard, Derek made his way to seat 16A, a window seat in the middle of the plane. He carefully slipped his briefcase under the seat in front of him, ensuring it was secure and out of the aisle. Then he settled in, took a deep breath, and pulled out his noise-canceling headphones. The low hum of the engine began to drown out the ambient noises of the cabin, and for a moment, Derek allowed himself to relax. It had been a long 18 hours. His latest federal surveillance operation in Tempe had finally wrapped up, not with the bang of a Hollywood-style bust, but with the slow, quiet grind of wiretaps, court orders, and endless paperwork. Days and nights blurred together, filled with silent observation and patient waiting. This was the kind of work that never made headlines, that few appreciated, but that kept the gears of justice turning behind the scenes. As Derek settled into his seat, the door closed, the safety announcements began, and the cabin crew prepared for takeoff. The plane had not yet moved, but the air already felt charged, like the calm before a storm. That's when she appeared. Across the aisle, a woman in her mid-50s stood hesitantly, clutching a large designer tote. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, though a few strands seemed out of place, and her too-strong perfume trailed behind her like a cloud. Her floral blouse was bright and cheerful, but it did little to soften the tightness around her eyes, which darted nervously as she approached Derek. "I think you're in my seat," she said, her voice polite but strained. Derek looked up, surprised for a brief moment before checking his boarding pass and then hers. "No, ma'am, this is 16A, he replied evenly, showing her the card. "Oh," she muttered, cheeks flushing slightly. "I'm 16B. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes and slid into the middle seat beside him. From that moment on, the atmosphere between them shifted. It was subtle at first, a stiffening of her posture, the way she clutched her tote like a shield, the quick, suspicious glances she shot his way. Derek noticed, but he said nothing. This wasn't his first time dealing with people's assumptions. Minutes later, as the plane prepared for pushback, she leaned toward him, lowering her voice. "Excuse me, would you mind?" Derek opened his eyes fully, confused. "Is your briefcase in my way?" "No," Derek said calmly. "Never mind," she said quickly, retreating back to her seat with a tight smile. Derek exhaled and closed his eyes again. He was tired, not just physically, but in a way that seeped deep into his bones. The kind of exhaustion that comes from years of navigating a world that often saw him first as a stereotype, not a man. Across the aisle, a young man wearing a hoodie and earbuds glanced over. His name was Jalen, a 23-year-old student heading home after finals. He gave Derek a subtle nod. "You good, man?" Which Derek returned with a short nod. The plane's engines hummed softly. The safety announcements droned on, and Derek tried to drown out the uneasy feeling creeping up his spine. Then it happened. The woman beside him pressed the call button. A young flight attendant appeared quickly. "I don't want to be a bother," the woman whispered, eyes darting nervously. "But could I possibly be reseated?" The attendant blinked, taken aback. "Is there something wrong with your seat?" "No," she replied, lowering her voice. "It's not the seat. It's the passenger next to me. I don't feel safe." Derek opened his eyes and stared out the window, expression unreadable. The attendant looked between the two of them. "Has he done anything to threaten you?" "No," the woman said quickly, "but he's been acting strange. He won't say what's in his briefcase, and when I asked if he could move it, he was cold. I just want to be safe." The flight attendant excused herself to find a supervisor. Derek's jaw tightened. The calm he had cultivated all morning was beginning to erode under a tide of unspoken accusations. Minutes later, a woman approached. Her name tag read, Callie, Flight Service Manager. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her expression professional but guarded. "Good morning," she said, scanning the row. "I understand there's a concern." The woman spoke up immediately. "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him. He's evasive and I think we should be cautious." Callie turned to Derek, her eyes sharp. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" Derek produced it without hesitation. The woman beside him crossed her arms, voice low. "It's not the seat that's the problem. He hasn't said a word since we sat down." "That's not suspicious," Derek replied dryly. "Being quiet isn't a crime." The woman's face reddened. "I'm just trusting my instincts," she said. Callie sighed, caught between protocol and the uncomfortable situation unfolding before her. "Unless there's a specific threat or incident, we can't simply reassign seats on suspicion." The woman leaned closer. "He's got a black briefcase and won't say what's inside. When I asked him to move it, he was cold. That's suspicious." Nearby passengers had begun to notice the tension. A man in 15 degrees Celsius turned his head sharply. "You're accusing him because of a briefcase?" he said incredulously. "I just want to be safe," she snapped back. "I think you want control," the man replied. The woman looked around as whispers spread. "I'd like to speak to the captain," she said finally. Derek exhaled slowly and spoke for the first time in a long while. "Is there a supervisor or air marshal on board? Because this is escalating over nothing." Callie nodded. "I'll notify the captain." The hum of the plane's engines was steady now, a mechanical heartbeat beneath the uneasy whispers that began to ripple through the cabin. The woman beside Derek, Margaret Hensley, had sunk into her seat, clutching her designer tote bag with a grip that made her knuckles white. The scent of her overpowering perfume lingered in the small space between them, mixing uncomfortably with the sterile air of the airplane. Across the aisle, Jalen shifted uncomfortably in his seat, eyes flicking between Derek and Margaret. His jaw tightened as if wrestling with a mix of frustration and helplessness. Around them, other passengers leaned in slightly, catching fragments of the unfolding drama. Minutes passed slowly, each one weighed down by the growing tension. Derek sat still, composed on the outside, but his mind was racing. He'd dealt with suspicion, bias, and false assumptions many times before. On the streets, in courtrooms, even in casual encounters. But never had the discomfort been so palpable and close, so public, so raw. Suddenly, the overhead speaker crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," a calm male voice announced. "We're currently preparing for pushback and departure. Thank you for your attention to the safety demonstration. We expect clear skies and a smooth flight to St. Louis." The usual mechanical safety instructions followed. Flight attendants moved purposefully down the aisles, checking seat belts and securing cabins. As one attendant approached Derek's row, she caught the nervous tremble in Margaret's fingers as she fastened her seatbelt. The woman's eyes darted anxiously toward the back of the plane, then toward the cockpit, her unease barely contained. Margaret pressed the call button again. "Hello," she whispered to the young flight attendant who appeared at her side. "I know this is last minute, but I really don't feel comfortable sitting next to him. Could I please be reseated?" The attendant's face flickered with surprise, then concern. Is there something wrong with your seat or the passenger beside you, ma'am? Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice. It's not the seat, it's him. He's... he's acting strange. I don't know what's in his briefcase, and when I asked him to move it, he was cold and unresponsive. I'm a mother, and I trust my instincts. The flight attendant nodded, taking mental notes before excusing herself to find the supervisor. Derek's jaw clenched, the words sinking into his skin like a cold drip. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. It wasn't the first time fear disguised itself as instinct around him. The moment stretched out. Derek could hear snippets of whispered conversations nearby, the sharp intake of breath, the subtle shifts of heads turning his way, the quick judgments made in silence. Then the door at the front of the cabin opened. In walked Callie Ramirez, the flight service manager. Her presence was immediately authoritative. No nonsense, professional, eyes sharp beneath thick, curly brown hair pulled into a tight bun. The air shifted as she made her way toward row 16. She stopped and looked directly at Margaret. Good morning. I understand there's been a concern? Margaret nodded quickly. Yes, I'm sorry to cause trouble, but I don't feel safe sitting next to this passenger. I think we should be cautious. Callie's gaze turned to Derek, who remained seated, calm but alert. Sir, Callie began, may I see your boarding pass one more time, please? Without hesitation, Derek produced his card and handed it over. Margaret's eyes narrowed. It's not the seat I'm worried about. He hasn't said a single word since we sat down. That's what's strange. That's not suspicious, Derek said quietly. Sometimes people just want to be quiet. Margaret's face flushed with frustration. I'm just listening to my gut. Callie sighed softly but maintained her professionalism. Ma'am, unless there is a specific threat or behavior that violates policy, we cannot reassign seats based on suspicion alone. But he won't say what's in his case, Margaret insisted, voice dropping. And when I asked if he could move it, he was cold. That's suspicious. Nearby passengers shifted uneasily. A man in seat 15C, mid-40s, turned to face Margaret with disbelief. Madam, you're accusing a man of suspicious behavior because of a briefcase? That's hardly reasonable. Margaret bristled, but the man's words seemed to echo a sentiment many were quietly thinking. I'm just trying to be safe, she said defensively. The man leaned forward. No, you're trying to control the situation. That's a different thing. Margaret looked away, sensing the silent judgment now gathering around her. Perhaps you'd like to speak to the captain, she said finally, her voice firm. Derek opened his eyes and exhaled slowly. Is there a supervisor or air marshal on board? He asked Callie, because this is escalating unnecessarily. Callie nodded, pulling out her radio. I'll notify the captain. The plane was still at the gate. The hum of engines filled the brief silence. Within minutes, the front cabin doors opened again. This time, James Caldwell, a broad-shouldered airline supervisor with a salt and pepper goatee, stepped on board, clipboard in hand. Behind him walked a local Phoenix police officer in standard uniform, not TSA or federal agents, but the routine security presence when complaints arise. Caldwell's eyes swept over the rows until he reached 16. Who made the report? He asked flatly. Margaret raised her hand, her voice quick. I did. I don't want to cause a scene, but I genuinely don't feel safe sitting next to him. Derek said nothing. Caldwell turned to Derek. Sir, we'd like to ask you to step off the plane for a brief security check. Am I being removed? Derek asked calmly. Just a routine check, Caldwell replied. It'll only take a minute. Passengers nearby shifted in their seats. Eyes darted between Derek and the airline staff. For what reason? Derek asked evenly. We've received a report of suspicious behavior, Caldwell answered. Derek nodded slowly, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. With one smooth motion, he pulled out a sleek black leather ID case and flipped it open. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Inside gleamed a gold badge embossed with the emblem of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words Senior Special Agent Derek Marshall, Organized Crime Division, were clearly visible. The local officer took a step back, eyes wide. A hush fell over the plane, passengers now fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Derek's voice was calm but firm. I am returning from a classified assignment. I boarded quietly and have done nothing to warrant removal or suspicion. Before you proceed, you might want to radio TSA or contact the Bureau to verify my credentials." Margaret's face turned ghostly pale. I, I didn't know. You didn't identify yourself," Derek interrupted gently. "I am not required to unless I am acting in an official capacity. I was simply trying to get home." Callie returned holding a radio. "The captain is awaiting confirmation." The officer whispered urgently into his device, then nodded. 2 minutes later, he approached Derek again, his voice apologetic. "Agent Marshall, your identity and credentials are confirmed. We appreciate your service and apologize for the inconvenience. You may continue without further delay." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Margaret remained frozen, clutching her tote as if it were a lifeline. Jalen leaned toward Derek, whispering, "Man, I'm sorry you had to go through that." Derek gave a small, tired smile. "It's nothing new, just louder today." Margaret finally broke the silence in a quiet voice. "I didn't mean to offend you." "You did," Derek replied softly. "You profiled me. You assumed something about me based on my skin, not my actions." A woman in 15D, holding a sleeping baby, spoke up from behind. "You didn't question me or my bag because I didn't look suspicious. That's bias, plain and simple." The weight of her words lingered. Margaret's shoulders sagged, her eyes downcast. The plane's engines roared louder as the seatbelt sign extinguished and the flight prepared for takeoff. Derek closed his eyes once more, the silence inside him heavier than the one in the cabin. The wheels of the airplane rumbled as they left the ground, the slight tilt and gentle shake signaling the start of the flight. Derek sat still in his window seat, eyes closed, letting the low drone of the engines drown out the noise inside his head, the noise that had become all too familiar over the years. Around him, the cabin slowly settled. Passengers busied themselves with phones, books, or attempts to nap, but an undercurrent of tension lingered in the air, like a fragile thread stretched taut. Margaret Hensley remained curled in her seat, clutching her tote as if it could shield her from the weight of the silent stares that had settled over her since Derek revealed his badge. Her face was pale, eyes downcast, no longer filled with the defensive fire of earlier. The woman who had demanded safety at the cost of another's dignity now wrestled with a quiet shame. Minutes ticked by, and then the flight attendant, Callie, returned. Her demeanor softened. In one hand, she held a folded piece of paper. In the other, a cup of water. She stopped beside Derek's seat. "Agent Marshall," she said quietly, "the captain wanted to make sure you're okay. He also asked me to give you this." Derek took the paper carefully and unfolded it. It was a handwritten note. "We sincerely apologize for the incident on board. It should not have happened. Thank you for your professionalism and service. Welcome aboard." He gave a small nod, the faintest hint of appreciation touching his lips. No grand gestures, no public statements, just a simple acknowledgement. Callie glanced toward Margaret but hesitated before speaking. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked politely, though her gaze clearly did not linger on the woman. Margaret only clenched her tote tighter, staring at the carpet. She did not answer. The silence around row 16 was heavy, filled with unspoken judgments and a palpable shift in atmosphere. Passengers tried to look away, pretending not to listen, but the uncomfortably shared experience had knitted a quiet community of witnesses. Jalen glanced at Derek again, his expression a mixture of respect and sorrow. "You handled that with so much dignity," he whispered. Derek shook his head slightly. "Dignity shouldn't have to be handled. It should be given freely." As the flight progressed, Margaret remained silent. Yet inside, a storm raged. Memories flashing of childhood lessons, fears inherited through generations. The uncomfortable realization of how easily bias could take root, even in someone who thought herself fair and open-minded. When the plane finally touched down in St. Louis, the usual bustle of disembarking began. Passengers stretched, gathered belongings, chatted quietly as if trying to erase the heaviness of the last hour. Derek stayed seated a moment longer, waiting for the crowd to thin before standing and gathering his things. At the jet bridge exit, Callie was there again. "Hope the rest of your day is better than this flight," she said quietly. Derek nodded. Thank you. I appreciate your professionalism. Behind him, Margaret stepped off the plane as well. Derek had overheard her name earlier. Rhonda Blake. She lingered near the gate, shifting uneasily, watching Derek as he moved away. He stopped and turned back. You're not waiting on someone? He asked. No, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to leave things like this. They stood in the busy corridor, strangers in the rush of travelers, yet connected by the weight of unspoken truths. Rhonda's voice cracked slightly as she spoke. I've been thinking about the flight, about what happened. I want to be honest. Derek listened. When I sat next to you, I was uncomfortable the moment I saw you. Before you spoke, before you moved. It wasn't about you. It was about me. That confession held a power that silence never could. Rhonda swallowed hard. I don't think of myself as racist. I never used hateful words. But I acted on bias. I made assumptions. And I didn't even realize how easy it was to do that. Derek regarded her quietly, searching her face for signs of performance or remorse. There was none. You said you felt unsafe, he said softly. But what I felt wasn't safety, Rhonda admitted. It was control. I was afraid not of what you were doing, but of what I imagined you might do, based on nothing. Derek nodded slowly. You deserved to feel embarrassed. Maybe you needed to. Rhonda looked down, tears glistening. I want to do better, if that means anything. Derek broke the silence at last. Start with the people who look like you. Talk to them. Call out bias when you see it. That's how things change. She exhaled as if releasing a weight she hadn't known she'd been carrying. Then she extended her hand. Derek looked at it for a moment, then met her eyes and shook firmly. No cameras, no announcements. Just a moment. Small, private, human. As Derek walked away, blending into the stream of travelers, one thought settled in his mind. What if I wasn't FBI? What if I had no badge, no title to protect me? Would fear have won? Would I have been removed? His dignity should not have depended on credentials. His right to exist, to travel quietly, should have been enough. That flight was not just about a badge. It was about confronting the dangerous comfort of assumptions, the quiet harm they cause every day, and the hope that next time, someone like Rhonda might choose to look, really look, instead of turning away.